up in lights, he just wants to be heard, whether it's the beat or the mic. He feels so unlike everybody else, alone, in spite of the fact that some people still think that they know him, but f*** him, he knows the code. It's not about the salary, it's all
There is something about anxiety that says, what am I neglecting in my soul? Yeah, that I need to pay attention to. There's only one question to ask. Right. There's only one question to ask, because that question can get answered again and again and again. Who am I? Because if we stop listening to our soul, then it'll stop speaking to us. But if we listen to it every day, we're going to hear things a lot of times that we don't like. But the more we listen to it, the more we follow it, boy, the more all of a sudden we find the synchrony in the world, and the more we start to fall in tune with the world. You know, I think as a filmmaker, there's this intersection between art and business. As a producer who has a great relationship with the director, and in this case I'm both of those individuals, I say, well, look, we can't afford this kind of red. When the director doesn't understand the producer's job, they're like, well, I have to have this red or I can't make the picture. It's like, okay, that's the problem, right? Like, there are a million shades of red.
I think so many people have different reasons why they do things. You're definitely one of the most selfless people I've met. Guys, welcome to another episode of the $1 Million Branders podcast. I am so excited to interview this guest live from downtown LA in our studio in person. The energy is magnetic, and it's an honor and a privilege to be able to interview Sebastian Siegel, a British-American screenwriter, director, author, and actor from Oxford, England, son of the acclaimed writer Lee Siegel and grandson of Yale historian Leonard Thompson. He began studying drama at 7 and won the drama prize at Kent School. A lifelong student of theatre, Zen, and philosophy, he credits influences like Alan Watts and Ken Wilber, featured on over 100 health magazine covers. We're going to dive deep into this. You know how much I love this. Sebastian has also been involved in companies valued between 12 million and 280 million. And he also has a profound series, which I have binge watched, called The 8 Questions, which is so profound. We spoke about going against the grain and interviewed some of the greatest people on the planet. But let's dive into the 8 questions for you. Are you ready? That is the question. So let's talk about tears, because I know I've had a lot. And often in life and business, tears often, I'm going to say, they signify deep transformation, whether from loss, realization, or breakthrough. Sebastian, in your experience, how do moments of emotional depth shape true leadership and creative success?
First of all, Justine, thank you for the great intro, and
Of
it's
course.
a pleasure to be here, and thank you for what you're doing with this show and the questions and sort of in delving deeper. And I think it's pertinent to the way that you frame the question about tears and about sort of emotional depth and cultivating that. And I think I would like to jump off right away and say that there is something that is amazing about technology and the exchange of information now laterally. That information used to travel vertically, and so it was filtered out. But now, because it's lateral, so much as we're able to consume. And obviously the danger in that is, the amazing thing about that is obviously we can consume things so rapidly and anything that we want all the time instantaneously. The danger being that I think that there is we have to have a gauge for what is lowest common denominator, right? In other words, what feels good that we're attracted to when we look at our phone or the computer or something like this, versus what feels challenging in a way that awakens us. And so pertinent to that, I think in the general world of podcasting, there's a lot of pop psychology, there's a lot of generic biohacking and stuff, and all of that's fine if somebody's interested in making a minor improvement perhaps, but ultimately can only last so long. And like, what are we really doing here? Is the objective to live longer? Is the objective to achieve more, to make more money, or is the objective deeper than that? And so in the question I think about tears is a profound one on a very fundamental, very simple level that, and I'll preface by saying as a boy, I was tremendously influenced by a number of different individuals, right? From poets to global leaders to orators. And one of them was just reading about Abraham Lincoln. And Abraham Lincoln was melancholic, yeah? And he would often sometimes, cry in public as well. But back then, it was so hard to take a photograph that it was not captured, yeah? But his tenderness and his melancholy was indicative of his compassion and the pain that he felt inside his self that existed outside in the world. And so because of that, that's what made him such a phenomenal leader, because he embodied that and he felt that. And so people listened to him because they felt that resonance within him. And so I think then in relating that to sort of pop psychology and what's happening in the general sense of podcasts which say, well, look, feel good, and you can, and you have all the medicine in your body to feel good right now. Don't be down, feel good, and that's fine. And I think it is important first thing in the morning to make a decision. I'm going to be happy today.
So happy you said that.
I'm not going to have a great day. I'm going to make a great day. However, anxiety and pain serve a purpose, and we have tears. We have tear ducts for a reason, and it's not just to cleanse the eyes, right? It is a product, or it is a result. It is an evolutionary response to this necessity to connect from our interiors to also what's happening around us and throughout. And so I think that, the sense of tears and of pain, tears, I suppose, in one way to say, these two emotions that are conflicting, let's say, tremendous joy, and tremendous pain. And if you look at someone's face when they're experiencing either one of those in an extreme circumstance, like let's say our own face, if you had a picture of yourself, in other words, in total devastation or in total joy, you wouldn't be able to really tell the difference, perhaps. Yeah, it's like with eroticism, like complete orgasm or something, or complete pain. You can't tell, because what happens there is our body surrenders, right? Our self surrenders, our little self here now surrenders. And the question is then, well, what is it surrendering to, right? And it's really surrendering to this rapture that moves through us, right? In other words, like in France, you might say, with orgasm, you would say, kill me, kill me, kill me. It's like a little death, right? An orgasm. And the idea is that, what is the death? It's the death of this little self, this identity of ego here now, to surrender, profound. To allow something to come through us. All right. So now, to simplify the whole thing and put a button on it, what is it that we love about laughing, right? It's that we've let go and let something take us over. Like there's this recognition in the punchline. What is it that we love about tears and about crying, even in pain? It's that we've surrendered something about ourselves to confront something, to allow these tears through. Or tears of joy. What is it that is so enjoyable about that? That these are the moments that are the most real. And so I think that this seeking out, particularly in this sort of New Age Western ideology of, you got to be happy all the time, I think it's very dangerous.
Yes.
Yeah? I think the mission is to be fulfilled, right? And fulfillment, a requisite for that, and an ongoing process of that is crying, right? And so tears are something that are very profound for me on a lot of levels.
Yes, and for me too. That was so beautifully put. Thank you so much, Sebastian. So in your journey through storytelling, and I know you've done a lot, and I actually had to have some sugar before I got you on the show because I knew this was going to get deep. But your journey through storytelling, philosophy, and deep conversations, how do you see the relationship between anxiety and joy? And do you believe anxiety is an inevitable cost of ambition and creativity? Or is joy something we can cultivate despite the uncertainty?
I think it's a great segue, and I appreciate the question because, coming off of tears, this sort of Western sense of don't be sad, right? And also, the overprescription of drugs to avoid pain, right? Now, certainly there is a moment in a time when you could say, okay, what's the cost versus the reward?
Yes.
Like, is this going to keep me or someone who's suicidal alive for just enough time a day to take another breath, to manage something? Okay. But for the most part, right, and speaking to, a majority of our experience, the seeking and attainment right, of happiness versus fulfillment, right, are two really different things that I think if we think about even like in union, you think, all right, I want to fall in love and I want to be with a partner, I want to be with a lover, I want to get married or something like this, or I want to do this, I want to get money or wealth or success or whatever the thing is. What is it that we're after, right? And it's this fantasy perhaps of being on a yacht or on a beach or something like this, But really the deeper joy is this sense of what's going on inside and what is it that I'm happy about. And really, and I was thinking when I first moved to California and I was laying outside in the grass and I was looking up and I thought, this is the same view that Madonna has, that Tom Cruise has, like I'm just looking up at
I love that thought.
I'm looking
That's
up at the
so
palm
awesome.
trees and I have the same exact view, if I'm laying on my back, and I'm grateful for that, right?
It's such a good thought.
So that's a state experience of saying like the ability to just be grateful, right? Which is joyous,
Yes.
right? Here, now. And then the other is, so how do I seek that out outside of the state experience, right? And the seeking of that, which requires a discipline for everybody, for me, for all great leaders, for every human being, right? Is to seek out fulfillment, right? Never happiness, right? That happiness is something we make a choice in the moment.
I'm so glad you're speaking about this.
Right? And the seeking of fulfillment, in other words, in this journey of getting married or falling in love or union, or whether it's with vocation or another individual or a team or in creating something, it's to say, what is, in the most Jungian sense, the world asking of me? What does God or the world want to come through me? And how do I give myself in service to that?
Yes.
And that's the seeking out of fulfillment. In other words, there's a bigger adventure than happiness, right? And that is becoming, right?
Wow.
That is self-actualization. And that individuals who are the most happy are on that journey of becoming, right? Of seeking fulfillment. And what are on the if you put in a thermometer in a room and you turn the heat on or the cool on at a certain temperature, sometimes anxiety is very healthy because it kicks in and it says, okay, what am I neglecting here, right? Like if I'm betraying something in myself, I don't want to ignore that anxiety. I want to feel that anxiety. And I want to say, wait a second, I'm ignoring something here. And I think that's a voice, or that's a statement that's not being told right now on 99% of the podcasts. It's really saying, oh, you just choose to be happy, right?
Drives me crazy.
And there is something about anxiety that says, what am I neglecting in my soul? Yeah, that I need to pay attention to.
Beautifully put.
Right? Because if we stop listening to our soul, then it'll stop speaking to us. But if we listen to it every day, we're going to hear things a lot of times that we don't like. But the more we listen to it, the more we follow it, boy, the more all of a sudden we find the synchrony in the world, and the more we start to fall in tune with the world.
It's beautiful. And the same with spirit too. Like the spirit and soul are so connected. So you're in for trouble if you don't follow both.
And I think of spirit being like, let's say, the gross level, physical level of the body, and the mind, then being this sort of access to, that is beyond, and the brain, the physicality exists, as an exterior product, derivative of mind, that consciousness precedes reality. So there's the mind, and then the soul, and then God or spirit, right? With the big S being this, timeless, formless sort of Atman, this thing that you can never touch because you are it, right? We are it, right? But it's this surrender to that, right? That we're ultimately all in oath to, whether we think we are or not, right?
So inspirational. And Sebastian, in your exploration of human experience through storytelling and philosophy, and your 8-question series, which, as I said before, I've binge watched, it's incredible. How do you differentiate between happiness and gratitude? And do you see gratitude as a prerequisite for happiness? Or do you believe one can exist without the other?
Thanks. I suppose we probably covered it already in some way, but I really respect and appreciate the question. That if I wake up in the morning and I say, okay, I'm going to make a great day, right? Versus have a great day. I'm going to make a great day. I'm going to make the choice. I'm going to frame it.
I love that verse.
You're right. And it starts with, Well, it's like, if somebody says, well, do you prefer where you're living now versus where you were living a year ago or 5 years ago? And the answer is never yes. It's always, I loved where I was at that time. Like, I loved the girl that I had a crush on in kindergarten and the one in 5th grade. But I'm glad it didn't work out. Like, I'm super happy with today. And I loved where I used to live. Like, we are not able to enjoy and love and appreciate the future if we can't appreciate the past.
So good.
And there's an adage in psychology, which is that it's never too late to have a great upbringing, right? It's never too great to have a great yesterday. Right? In other words, the present is the creative moment. The present forms the past, not the other way around. And people think the past forms the present, but it's really that if I say now, this person was so hard on me, right? Boy, that's a heavy baggage to carry. But if I say, this person was hard on me, wow, it really shaped me into something amazing. And not with any kind of, but I forgive them. Just like, I'm so grateful for that person. What a teacher, My stepfather was an unbelievable disciplinarian. And he was my father. We lived with my mother and him in South Texas from the time I was 4 to 14. And I called him Dad, and he commanded that, and I'm so grateful for him. And then when I turned 14, he took me hunting, and then he never talked to me again. And I referenced him in a number of magazines that I was on the covers of, and I sent them to his office, and I called him, and he wanted to move on from my mother and my brother and I understand that. And for a while, I suppose as a young boy, it was confusing for me. And now retrospectively, I'm so grateful to him that I don't know if I would be alive.
Yes.
The discipline that he gave me, but also the autonomy that it was for me crucifying in some way, right? But I'm so grateful because he was that guy. He was very stoic, and it gifted me something that could not be taught, that could only be procured from within through experience and example, right? Like the tenets of, being in an extreme military group, or extreme disciplinary group, or like a Navy SEAL. It's not taught intellectually; it's experienced. That we learn brotherhood, right? We learn this sort of what devotion is in those ways, and so I think that, in other words, i.e., per the question, gratitude is something that's attainable, and it's something that we can embody and engage right now. That if I say I'm thankful, for everything that is occurring, that's pretty humble. And I like that. That feels good, and then automatically I feel sort of like happy about the thing. That's a nice place to be. So I think gratitude is a simple, and I think gratitude is also the most rapid, easy vehicle to direct line to God. Right, direct line to spirit.
Truly believe that.
Right,
100%.
It just feel like immediately the world feels so good.
Wow, what a story! Also, let's talk about eternal life and God, because I'm a big believer God is behind everything we do, and we go about gratefulness. I believe and I know in my life I've thanked God for the good and the bad and the ugly, and it's also helped. I'm going to say morph my character. And it has built my character. So if eternity exists and it's measured by time or the depth of our connection to the divine, what do you think about this topic, eternal life and God? And also, how important is it to weave God into everything we do?
Okay, I like this.
Big question.
This is good. Maybe we split them in two.
Yeah, let's do it.
And so we'll just talk about eternal life for a moment.
Okay. This is a big one. Do we need a whiskey?
Thank you. Let's have a whiskey. Absolutely. Eternal life is a wonderful notion, right? And I think it's depicted in poetry and in music and in art and in movies in this way that is super romantic, like I meet you in another life, this kind of thing, and or bending time and touching, this other space, right? And in the most fundamental levels, and without going into sort of Vedantic or Buddhist or Hindu tenets, but just in sort of very obvious terms, right? The misconception, right, that we have is oh, I want this physical body to live forever, right? Like my acquaintance, we met briefly, Brian Johnson is this gentleman in Santa Monica who has this thing like, I want to live forever, don't die, like I'm going to live to 200 and this kind of thing. And I was the other day, now this is becoming the thing, I ran into this guy, he's like, hey, didn't you find out we can change our molecules and we can live to 150 or 200 or 300? It's just like, okay, let's debate the topic. Like, that is to me the most obviously self-centric, egocentric, selfish statement and ideology.
I have to agree, actually. Right? Yeah.
Like, we live forever already, right, as facsimiles of one another. That God carries on, and at some point, right, it's great to cleanse the palate. Yeah. At some point, the tree and the plants and the flowers fall and die and are reabsorbed. At some point, the rain falls from the clouds and is reabsorbed. Where I'm going with that is that it is my turn. Yeah, just like with birth is the most incredible rite of passage, and puberty is an incredible rite of passage, and death is an incredible rite of passage. And what has to happen in birth, right? Like the mother has to push and push and surrender and surrender and push and surrender and let go, right? To give way, and the baby intuitively comes, and squeezes through and comes out, right, into this world. And when we again consciously then in this life, when we go through puberty, wow, this is intimidating and the world is confusing and I don't know what's happening here. Whoa, this is exciting. Whoa, this is scary. Whoa, this is daunting. And then all of a sudden, wow, this is so much better. Like, this is great, right? And it's the same thing with death. And so what is this thing of what is this? I am so great. I want to put off death. I don't want death to happen.
Interfering with God's way, I think. Yes, also.
Even in a more simple sense, right? Like when you hear a song, Beethoven's Fifth, wow, it's wonderful when the song begins, and it's wonderful in the middle, and it's wonderful when it ends. Like this bum 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 wouldn't be there without the bum 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 and without the ending. And so my life is not a story, and your life is not a story, and our lives as a country, as a species, the human species, right? As a family, as an entity, as a whatever, as a story, doesn't exist without an ending, right? Doesn't exist if we don't cast off the skin and create a new skin. Okay, so to step, from that sort of abstract sense, then from sort of eternal life, like it is selfish to say, oh, I'm going to carry on and live, like I need to live 500 years. Like, no, who cares? Like, this is so greedy. Like, if you can't get it done in 100 years, like you're not doing it right.
Yes.
Like, this is enough,
I agree. Yep.
Okay, so then the question really then, I think also about eternal life is to say, you're at the beach or you're in the park and you look over and you see this a 3-year-old, and they're playing with something, a flower, and they're looking around and they're feeling, and then they look up and they see you and you catch eye contact, right? And you look and they look and you look and they're like, and you look and you look, and that's it. Now, you have that memory as a 3 or 4 or 5-year-old with someone. I have that memory, and you have that memory and notion as an adult, right? Many times. And who's doing the looking here? Who's doing the looking? All right, so the answer is it's God that's doing the looking through both eyes. So we already live forever. We already live forever. So I am devoted enough, the little me now, am aware of this thing that's occurring, that I don't need to carry on. Like, I speak a language that we understand here now that will be insignificant in 1,000 years from now, or even 200 years from now, right? And I participate now, and I carry the torch, and it is my duty, and the greatest duty of devotion, to pass that torch on to another being, to other beings, to let it pass forward, right? And even the expression of here now on this podcast is the expression in celebration, in devotion, right, to that. So I think this sensibility of eternal life is that we already have it, right? And the mission is not to make life longer, but it's to make life wider and deeper and more connected, right?
So good.
Yeah.
This is a book. This podcast is a book. How important is it to weave God into everything we do?
We don't have a choice. I mean, it's a great question because I think, okay, so in my series on YouTube, The 8 Questions, right, which is streaming now, it's 51 episodes, and it's what's the purpose of life, what's love, what's heaven, what's hell, what's intimacy, what's religions, what's spirituality, and what's God. And I think that when we talk about God, right, first of all, there are sort of 2 modes of knowing, right? And, this sense of, okay, God speaks to us in a lot of different vectors. In other words, we recognize eternal life and God through a number of different vectors, whether it's in nature, whether it's in meditation or prayer, whether it's in love or whether it's in devotion, etc. And then there is, I think, this sort of manifest realm of God, which is the physical universe, and then the unmanifest realm, right? And it's my sense that consciousness precedes reality. In other words, interiors and exteriors, right? And so to speak about that in really simple terms, I had this party at my home one time in Sunset Plaza, and I had these 2 friends over, and they were like both successful, spectacular women, and one was this brilliant psychologist, and the other one was this brilliant neuroscientist, and they sort of looked alike, and I thought, oh my God, and the relationship I was in at the time, this woman, she was a psychologist, and I thought, we're going to introduce them, and she was like, yes, it's going to be great, right? It was 15 years ago or something. And so we had this party and we introduced them, and they didn't have anything to talk about. Like, they didn't get along at all, right? And then we were talking about it afterwards. They're both spectacular. And we thought about afterwards, of course, they didn't have anything to talk about, because one, right, the neuroscientist is exploring and examining and is devoted vocationally to the physical world, exteriors, right, meaning measuring and exploring and investigating neurons in the brain, right, which is an exterior. And the interior correlate of that, which is not measurable, is the mind, right? Which is, that if you are thinking about purple or an elephant or whatever the thing is.
All these things right now.
Right, that I don't know
yes.
unless you share it with me.
Yes.
Right? And I think that, Alfred Whitehead would talk about the fallacy of misplaced concreteness, meaning that we have this sense of the world that it is the way that it is because it occurs every day. But it's not concrete. Right? It's abstract and it's dynamic and it's in flux all the time. And the danger and all the amazing things with our technology of measurement and our science and all these biohackers now, they're great. All those metrics are great, amazing, wonderful if they can guide a sort of certain path. But that's not the end all,
yes.
right? Consciousness precedes reality. In other words, the interior, right, is the component or aspect of God that fascinates me the most, because it's the one that's ignored the most, especially in this world now with technology, right? In other words, on a fundamental level, like you look at protons, neutrons, electrons, right, atoms, quarks even, whatever, if you're even looking at larger things like cells or molecules, and you're saying, well, look at, they're moving, right? And then, okay, that evolves into, protons, neutrons, electrons, and then, atoms, and then cells, and then molecules, and then more complex life. Okay, and then conscious brains develop, and then consciousness. Okay, but actually, right, that's fine, that's true, right, measurably, and scientific, and looking at the history of biology and evolution. But that's only looking at the exteriors. Now let's look at the interiors. What's driving those molecules? What's driving those protons and neutrons and electrons? What's driving those quarks? Well, that is the same thing as you thinking about the elephant or purple or some sort of sense of something, some sort of abstract concept. That's the interior, right? Those are the interiors, and that's the exciting part. That's where my whole life as a storyteller and as a filmmaker is devoted to, right? That's what fascinates me the most. In other words, God, spirit, is driving that. And I can describe that in the most simple, fundamental, non-philosophical, non-abstract way. Okay? And I'm going to do it right now. This is where we cut to commercial. Okay. So you think about the Big Bang. And Stephen Hawking wrote this incredible book, right? A Brief History of Time, which describes the Big Bang until today. Yes. And it explores everything from the Big Bang up until now. but just the exteriors, just the measurable physical universe, as that is his specialty, right? As a physicist, as a brilliant scientist.
Yeah.
Extraordinary. Now, Ken Wilber wrote a book called A Brief History of Everything, which describes the Big Bang until now, or all Big Bangs and sort of beyond time, but not just the exteriors, the interiors as well. In other words, the evolution of meaning, of religion, of poetry, and of politics, and of the physical universe and the physical space. And if you think about the simple part that I'm going to is, let's just take the physical world for a moment, and let's just take for granted the Big Bang, like say, okay, there's this Big Bang, like however many of them happening all the time perhaps, but let's just take for simplicity's sense, the Big Bang, and then there's like these quarks and protons and neutrons and electrons, and they're floating around in infinite space. Okay, so like just picture that. Well then what? Like what happens? They have this drive to come together.
Yes.
Protons, neutrons, and electrons in infinite space. All right, so what are the odds of that? None. There's no odds. That can't happen. But it happens. Why? Right? That's God. Why? There's this desire to come together to create more, this impulse for communication, for depth connection. And so then all of a sudden, protons, neutrons, and electrons become atoms. Spectacular, right? And then all these atoms in infinite space-time. Okay, so what? That's impossible. They're never going to connect. And then, but they do. They connect. Even our notion of the universe is expanding and contracting like this. And they connect. Why? How? So in other words, and then cells, and then molecules, and then molecules and cells. And then it's like you look at advanced life and you say, or what is our desire, right? It's always to connect.
Yes.
Right? That, in other words, at the base, most fundamental level, this impulse for connection, whether it's finding beauty in a flower or the stars or an animal or another person, it's just this simple thing. You and I having eye contact right now that feels so good. That's just saying, I want to connect. This will. And what is it that's satisfying? That's the will of spirit. That's the will of God. And so, to answer the question in short, right, how do we weave God into everything? It's happening already, right? And if we're not cognizant of that, we can still move forward. But being cognizant of that is a statement that the little I, me here now, this little person in the world, is aware that I'm not in charge, that I'm not in control. But that if I give my best foot forward, if I do my best, and if I surrender, God moves through me. And I have faith that other people are doing that as well, and God moves through them as well. Now, if somebody's not doing that, God's still moving through them. And it hurts sometimes, and that's okay too, right? Because the ultimate mission is not my happiness. It's fulfillment, and it's devotion, and it's surrender. And so I think that, God moves through us, whether we like it or not. And I think so we might as well have a good time, and the choice to have a good time is an awareness of how insignificant we are, and that's not a melancholic thing at all. That's a wonderful thing. Like, wow, the responsibility of the world is not on me, right? Do my best. And there's this wonderful Catholic joke, which I really like, which is like, there's good news and there's good news, right? The good news is there's a Messiah, and the good news is it's not you, right?
Great news. Good to know that now.
Yeah, right. It's like, okay, everyone wants to go out and fix the world. Like, don't do that.
Yes.
Don't do that. Like that.
It's comforting knowing that, actually.
Right. Totally. Yes. That becomes evangelical.
Yes.
And surrender to the world. Allow. Like, give your best. Speak the voice. But allow.
Wow.
Thank you so much for the wonderful question.
Oh, it's such a good, seriously, the answers are just beautiful. Thank you. Let's talk about stages of love, shall we? Especially when it comes, so this is a branding podcast and a business podcast. When it comes to branding and business, so a lot of people create brands, and I think they do it in a way, I've seen a lot of people do it subconsciously, I'm going to say selfishly, for selfish reasons, which we all need money, but does love evolve through time, or does it simply reveal different versions of itself as we grow?
That's beautiful, beautifully stated. Yeah, love has, I did this sort of 15-year study on love. And it was through and I expressed it, the process for me to be able to ground it in some sort of thesis was in 2 films. And the first was a documentary called Awakening World, which is 5 questions. What's the purpose of life? Love, heaven, hell, intimacy. And that's distributed by Beyond Words. It's a very simple 40-minute film, but I wanted to put the work that I was doing weekly into some sort of product for my own discipline so that I would have, benchmark time, commitments, etc. And then in Grace and Grit, which is a 10-year project for me, which is the Ken Wilber story that takes place over 5 years in Northern California, an epic love story, a true story. It's streaming now on Apple, Amazon, and everywhere else in the world on Netflix.
Amazing.
And that's a story really about eternal love and love beyond life, and devotion and surrender and crucifixion and resurrection, not in the religious sense, but in the mystical sense as well. And in that time, right, I really identified 5 stages of love, right,
Yes.
of which my next book is about, and my TED Talk will be about, which is the first stage is romantic love. And romantic love is just this fantasy, just this projection, just this hope and this ideal of what will be that has nothing to do with the other individual, right? It's like you see someone and you're like, this is the life we're going to live.
Yes.
I'm in love,
Yes.
right? And fine, and that's wonderful, romantic love, because that gets us excited. It gets us to step out in the world, to take risks, to go say hello to someone, to engage in some way with something. And that leads then to passionate love, which is the second stage of love, which is evolutionary love as well, that then you spend time with someone and there's this passion, this will to procreate, to mate, to connect, right? There's a pheromone. I like this. I'm attracted to this person. There's this thing that's evolutionary, that I must yield to. These forces that I don't have control over. That I want to be around this person, right? And that's passionate love, and we all know that, right? That's like all the great love songs, right? That's Roberta Flack and Marvin Gaye and
Beautiful.
the best, right? All the things that I learned so much about romantic and passionate love as a boy, listening to those brilliant musicians. And then after passionate love comes courageous love, right, which is the third stage that I've identified. And courageous love is saying, okay, I'm now with this person, and boy, there are a lot of things that I disagree with, and there are a lot of priorities that aren't in line with mine. But I love this person to the best of my ability, and it's worth the pain, and it's worth the discord, and I find myself growing, in fact, in a way, by being around this person. Right, and so I'm going to sacrifice the joy and the growth and the connection is worth the price of admission. That's courageous love. So now I'm in it. Okay, this is where it gets really interesting, right? So that's the third stage. So then the next stage, right, is selfless love. Okay, and selfless love is wonderful because then there's this recognition that there's myself and this other, but there's something bigger than that. There's an us. There's this we.
Yes.
That is more important than that person and more important than me. That now I'm deep enough that I'm ready to take on a broader identity.
Yes.
That I identify with me. I have agency, autonomy, and I understand this other individual. But there's something that we are doing in the world together. Ooh, it's scary. We've both got to be in it. But I'm surrendering to that, right? And that's selfless love. Yeah, oftentimes people feel that, like, with a child or in a family unit with a child, when they're really cognizant and say, look, I'm going to devote something for the sake of what I think is best right now for me, for my lover, for the child, for the family. Selfless love. And then now this is really the really fun part for me. Is this
I'm ready.
Right? Okay.
Let's go.
Okay.
Let's do it.
Go to commercial again. Then the fifth stage of love, which is transcendent love, which my film is about. In the last 15 minutes of that film carries us into transcendent love. That's Grace and Grit, and the book also, which is a brilliant book by Ken Wilber, 400-page book. And transcendent love is, as Martin Buber talks about, this I-thou relationship. Now, what's spectacular about transcendent love, that in the relationship with a singular other, you say, okay, I'm loving God, now through loving the other, that in my eye contact with the other individual, I'm loving God. That if I love this woman, I'm loving the great mother, not just this woman. And it is my devotion and my practice in loving God to love this woman, so that even if she betrays me, I will love her because I must love the great mother. And that is what I must do. Yeah, even as I came out of the womb, I mean, life is an experience of separation. I was inside, and then I was cut loose. The umbilical cord was cut. And then I was sucking the breast, and then I could no longer suck the breast. It's like farther and farther away. It's, these are our first experiences of separation. And yet, it has sustained me and given me life. And so I must devote myself to loving the great mother everywhere. And so same for the woman, and loving the great mother and loving the great father, that this I-thou relationship with God. Now, what's spectacular about that with transcendent love is it then carries over not just into the other individual, but when somebody can experience a transcendent love with an other, that it starts to touch all surfaces the same. That then you see the dog or the cat or the animal or the child or in passing, and you get a glimpse. And because you've been sitting in transcendent love and have this sense of like this relationship of God, that then you start to experience it all the time. Right? And then you start to see somebody and you think, well, wow, I don't know that person, but I love God, and I'm experiencing God in that person, not just what's inside that person's eyes, right? But what's God is seeing through my eyes, and the awareness of what God is experiencing through that person's eyes. And that's transcendent love. And those are the 5 stages that I've developed and
absolutely
and
profound.
Devoted.
I think transcendent love is my favorite, for the record.
And the other ones are all
other ones I'm like,
the other ones are all
lame compared
the other
to
ones
that.
are all but the other ones are important
kidding.
because they're all gateway
No, I know.
drugs. They're
Yes,
gateway
that's it.
drugs, it's like
It is
like,
gateway drugs.
smoking and drinking, and then like,
Exactly.
cocaine, and then heroin, and then, like
Exactly.
you gotta go. They're all like gateway drugs to
hilarious.
transcendent love.
Wow.
Which is true, because it doesn't end with death.
Yes.
Right, it goes on. The story goes on, and I, if I can just self-indulge for a second here.
Of course.
My grandmother, Noreen Nash, my father's mother, she died at 99, and a couple of years ago, and I still have this relationship with her, right? And it's I say to my father, it's very interesting because he doesn't have a sense of God in any way, and he's this brilliant professor and author, and author of Sanskrit and Indian religions, and he's written 15 books on romance and love and in India, and you can get all those books as well. They're all brilliant, highly acclaimed books.
Yes.
With my father, Lee
Incredible.
Siegel, that's Siegel. There's 2 Lee Siegels out there.
I've got a lot of reading to do.
You got a lot of reading
in
too.
the 13 and a half flight home. I will be doing some reading.
He's brilliant. And
Excellent.
now one of the things that drives our relationship is that we have very different interests. Yeah. And anyways, when I ask him about his mother, he says, yeah, she was an amazing woman, and it's very much in the past for him. Now, for me, it's very much in the present, meaning that I embody that relationship, and I think about why I would take my grandmother for dinner, and I think about her light blue eyes and her grace. And when I think about that, and then I embody that, and I feel like, wow, she would love this if she was here today. She would love this experience that I'm having, and I feel that joy. Okay, so that's fantastical in some way. But if I'm embodying that, I'm taking the past and I'm infusing the creative moment, the present, which is all there is, with that. And so I'm having an active relationship beyond her life with her. And that's an example of eternal love. In other words, that's an example of how transcendent love lives on. Because people think, well, how can it live on after death? Because it's not about you. It's not about me. It's not about my death. She's living on through this experience right now. 100%. As may someone after I die.
Yes.
Fantastic. Even better. Like the amazing relationships that I'm having with someone right now, and a now that exists. however long in the future, maybe tomorrow.
If you are enjoying this episode, if you have gotten value from this episode and it has changed your life by teaching you things, I'm going to ask you a huge favor. If you would subscribe, like, follow, and share with people so we can bring more incredible guests to the $1 Million Branders podcast to serve you better, so you can make more money in your business, in your life, and accelerate your growth into becoming the $1 Million brand that I know is possible for you. Thank you, and my greatest appreciation to you. Let's talk about Grace and Grit.
Grace and Grit.
Grace and Grit,
Yeah.
sorry. Let's talk about Grace and Grit. So we'll bring it back to business, because I can imagine you've had such a successful career, which I'm sure has taken a lot of energy, attitude, grace, and grit. When a business faces its breaking point, does survival depend on sheer resilience or its reinvention? Or is reinvention the real key to oh my gosh, I have to go again.
longevity?
We'll edit it. Yes, let me go again. So let's talk about grace and grit. When a business faces its breaking point, does survival depend on sheer resilience, or is reinvention the real key to oh my God. I have to reword this.
Yeah.
But yeah, let's go.
Well, I appreciate that as a successful businesswoman. Yeah. And your knowledge of that, Justine. Movies are interesting because one of the things I enjoy about it most is, I'm a director, and I'm a writer, and I'm a storyteller, and I'm a producer by default because there's so many things that I wanted to tell in the world that no one wanted to tell, and no one wanted to support me in telling, and so I said, well, I have to produce this, right? And then I found out that I was quite good at that, and it was because I'm happy to take initiative, and I'm happy to push through. And if I believe and I can see it, then it doesn't matter if anyone else sees it, and I go forth,
Love
right?
That. Absolutely love that.
And every successful business person, right, such as yourself, knows that, right, and sees that, right? That if your idea is in agreement with everyone, there's a problem, right? There's got to be some disagreement if you're ahead of the curve because people don't see it, right? I think as a filmmaker, there's this intersection between art and business, right? And you say, well, I want to make this beautiful story. Well, let's use the analogy of a painting, right? And there's a canvas and the paints and the frame, etc.
Yes.
And it's important to have deadlines, and it's important to have constraints. And as a producer, who has a great relationship with the director, and in this case, I'm both of those individuals, I say, well, look, we can't afford this kind of red, And when the director doesn't understand the producer's job, they're like, well, I have to have this red or I can't make the picture. It's like, okay, that's the problem, right? Like there are a million shades of red. There's perhaps a better one than you imagined out there.
Yes.
Okay, and then the same thing comes to the canvas. I have to have this kind of canvas. Well, there's so many others. I have to have this frame. Well, there's so many others. There's so many wood carvings. There's so many materials. It has to be this size, et cetera, et cetera. The point is, right, that the creative component and dynamic of filmmaking is that what happens in collaboration is far greater than any one individual can procure. And in Grace and Grit, I have this vision, and I devoted my finances, my time, a decade of my life to tell this story. The story took place over 5 years, and it's watchable in an hour and 45 minutes. It took me 10 years to make it,
crazy.
right?
Yes.
Because it's more important than me. It's so much more important to me. It's a story about these 5 stages of love and ultimately about transcendent love. I'm going to go on a little short tangent here. When the movie came out, and the movie is like 90% on Amazon, and it's hugely popular. It was a top trending movie in Latin America for a while. So Latin audiences tend to really like films that stir you up and evoke you. Yeah, but this is not a rom-com. This is not an easy film to watch. The first 30 minutes of the movie, 20 minutes of the movie is really dreamy. In the middle hour is like Philadelphia, that brilliant film, and it like skewers you. That's very uncomfortable to watch. And then the last 30 minutes is like nothing you've ever seen in pictures before. I promise that. And that's not because of me. That's because of the source material written by Ken Wilber. And it's because of all these brilliant artists who I collaborated with.
Yes.
Right? These brilliant actors, extraordinary people on every component of filmmaking. And it ended up even just gorgeous. And Ken Wilber, the author of the book, feels the same way, and responded to it in the same way, as did Alex Gray, the brilliant artist, as did Deepak Chopra. He watched it on his 70th birthday and told me afterwards that it was, profound and compelling for him, as did John Mackey, the founder of Whole Foods, as did Marianne Williamson, as did a number of different individuals. Now, here's where it's very interesting. The woman who critiqued it from the New York Times gave it the skewering review. It was like worst movie ever made, like horrible acting, horrible score, horrible, okay, so I walk the talk. So grateful for that horrible review. Because when we opened at the Chinese Theater IMAX, right? The most important movie theater in the world. And when we showed in Sedona, right? Packed audience of people saying, I've never seen a scene like that.
Wow.
The last scene in the film. I've never seen that. I experienced that with the love of my life, right? And I've never seen that. And the woman or man who's here with me today, that eternal love is transfused now into this relationship that I have now, right? And thank you for doing that. And they're not thanking me, they're thanking the entire picture and Ken Wilber for telling that story. So that's and the question is about business, right? So when the New York Times hits and people call me and said, and a lot of the greatest directors in the world called me after that came out and said, listen, your film's extraordinary. I saw it. I bawled my eyes out. And these are Academy Award winning directors who called me and said this. And they said, I got skewered by the New York Times as well. And it's a sign that you're doing something right. Your film is so far ahead of the curve. And Chong Yim Trungpa has this thing about, a movie comes out, if it's really good, it'll be hammered by the critics, but it'll find its audience. And in 10 years, people will be like, I understand, right? And so, we're feeling that now because the movie's becoming more popular now, not less popular. So as a business person, right, as a producer, I say, okay, the highest regard then of devotion beyond the storytelling is to serve financially the individuals who support, and put this film out, which is I'm also one of those individuals. And it is to say, okay, I understand. So in the making of that film, I had a number of opportunities to make that film for $10 million, for $5 million, $8 million, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. But it wasn't it was contingent upon an actress that I didn't think was right because of my devotion to this material.
Yes.
I have to have the integrity there as a storyteller, or other things that I didn't think were correct. And then when we made it, that was the right fit. Minu Suvari plays the lead with Stuart Townsend and Francis Fisher and Mariel Hemingway, and it's gorgeous. It's gorgeous, and they were all amazing, And the review in the New York Times made the movie more popular because people were defensive of the movie. They thought, whoa, this woman was really triggered by this. I got to see that.
Wow.
I got to see that. And then they see, and you can see the reviews. People went out and fight for. They said, "What are you talking about?" It was interesting because Kim and Catherine Kluge, two of the most brilliant musicians who score movies, did that score with me. And the movie they did right before that was Scorsese's Silence, which is spectacular. And the woman wrote horrible music in there, without doing her research and knowing even who was involved in the film. So I'm super grateful for that, because that sparked a number of other things, and all the other things, online are hyperbolic about it. So yes, the success in business certainly is about durability and resilience, but I think moreover, it's about the integrity to trust one's intuition.
Yes.
To say, I'm here, I'm going to sail across this ocean. It may kill me, but there's something more important here. For me, that's exciting business, right? 1492, Columbus is like, I'm going, right? A lot of problems, a lot of situations there, but he makes it across. Every business is that, whether it's
absolutely
Tesla or SpaceX or Microsoft or the toaster, it doesn't matter. Every business is that. In other words, the original expression, as Roy Yamaguchi says, and he's also online in the 8 Questions, the brilliant chef of Roy's. the original expression is that intuition, right? And you think, where do ideas come from? Like, they don't come from here. They don't come from us, right? They come through us.
So great.
And so the mission is to surrender and be in full devotion to that idea, and then pliable and flexible to see it through, right? And know that we don't know, but trust that intuition so profoundly. So I think that ultimately, let's say I'm going to put a rocket on Mars or something like this. And it was interesting because Elon Musk and I had dinner twice many years ago before he was well known, and we were seated next to each other. And he was like, "What are you doing?" And I said, "I'm making this movie about Ken Wilber." And he said, "Wow, that's epic." You know, Ken Wilber's one of those brilliant people ever. And I said, "What are you doing?" He says, "I'm going to put this rocket on Mars." I said, "Whoa, that's
so
cool,
great.
man." And no one knew who he was. And we were messaging, and then all of a sudden he's like this person who's like running one of these people running the world. Like him or not, doesn't matter. He's brilliant. He's extraordinary.
He is brilliant.
But to the point, right, that, you know, and as a referent, in other words, what do we have in common there, is there's a devotion to this expression that isn't about money. That money's a byproduct of that devotion, right? That for me, it's a devotion to telling a story about transcendent love,
Yes.
about crucifixion, about resurrection, about Moses charting the splitting of the Red Sea. For Elon, it's about putting a rocket on Mars, you know, or a number of other things. And so I think that the ultimate business person to succeed at the highest level has got to be resilient, right? And the word you used, Justine, you know, reinvent, is quite interesting, right? Because reinvent, and as somebody in branding, is really like repackaging.
Absolutely.
But it's the same product that's coming through. You know, and I referenced earlier Madonna, which I think is a great reference here, because like Madonna is not the most, she doesn't have the most amazing voice, you know?
She's good at
and she's not the
reinvention.
most, you know, amazing in any particular, but she is the most amazing producer.
Yes.
And her sensibility about what it is, you know, her fingers was, you know, for so many decades on the pulse of what audiences want to hear. And so she would reinvent herself. But really it's the same voice coming through, you know, her message is the same message coming through, but she's repackaging it in ways, wow, you know, is extraordinary, you know, and you think the way that she ties it together with the singing and the dancing and the choreography and the music and the storytelling and the videos and how she choreographs every single detail. And then other artists have copied her since then, you know, and gone on to do that, you know, like her, many brilliant artists. So I think that the resilience comes from ultimately, you know, the singular statement is devotion to the original intuition and full commitment. For me, this is more important than me, right? Because that's not heavy pressure. That's like, oh, okay, cool.
Absolutely.
So like if I die on the way, so what? Right. And I think that's, you know, quintessential to success. I've been super fortunate. Like I came here with nothing. I made my first $1 million before I was 30, not because I was seeking money, but because I said, oh, well, I'm going to buy this piece of land. I'm going to build this place. And then I show up in the condo, my first place, and I was like, oh my God, there's no walls. There's pigeons going to the bathroom. Just tiny, what have I done with my life, you know? The next thing you know, it's like doubled in price. I'm like, wow, I'm so lucky. I'm fortunate, you know? And then again and then again. And then the same thing with the magazines, you know? When I went into Weeder, it was like, okay, I didn't say I want to do all this with you guys. They were like, what do you want to do? I said, I want to be on all your magazine covers. They're like, okay, good luck, buddy. You know, and I said, it's not because I want it for me, but I just feel like I'm in great shape and I'm a natural athlete. And I feel, I feel this. And I just bothered them every week until eventually Joe Weeder was like, that guy's going on the cover. It was one of the last covers he chose, my first cover for Men's Fitness. And then it was over 100 in like 5 or 6 years. I worked with all these companies. I took ownerships in companies, did endorsement deals. I was lucky, fortunate in real estate. I was fortunate in the health and fitness industry. And then as a storyteller, I was lucky. I started as an actor, worked on many shows, Lost, Hawaii Five-0, Magnet P.I., Quantico. I did 2 shows with Tyler Perry. I've been very lucky. I just did a movie called Fate, which will be out next year.
So excited.
And I helped bring Harvey Keitel and Mina Suvardi to that film as well. And then as a producer and a director to be able to do now the 8 Questions and First Awakening World and then Grace and Grit, which opened the Chinese Theater. And it's not about, for me, business savvy. It's about my devotion to the original intuition.
So great.
So that's for me the only thing I have to say about success is like, if the intuition comes through and it's strong, no to the sports games, no to the birthdays, no to the funerals and the weddings and all the other things. Really devote.
Tunnel vision.
Because God is asking you to give yourself to something.
Purpose. Legacy.
And if you don't give yourself to that, how will you feel? If you go to all these other things. And if you do give yourself to that, how will you feel when you show up at 2 or 3 of these things? Amazing. I'm so grateful to be here right now with you, right?
Likewise.
And part of that is because I am devoted to what I do, and I get to discuss the things that I love with you because you're also devoted to what you do.
It's very special, actually. There have been many times in this interview I've wanted to cry.
That's
in a good way. It's been so profound. For my last question, because I know there are only 8, if we had only 8 questions to ask before the end, what would they be? Or you can give me one.
Wait, what do you mean?
Before the end, like before our life ends, which we've spoken about, and I know that we are transcendent, but from your perspective.
Yeah, I like this a lot, and it's immediate for me, and it's only one question. Yeah, and it's a very fundamental question. Should we cut to commercial now?
Yeah, let's do it. I feel like I need a whiskey.
That's right. There's only one question to ask, right? There's only one question to ask because that question can get answered again and again and again, and with new discoveries. And it's the most fundamental, basic meditation. And for me in this life, it was like my first conventional meditation jam, right? And the question is, who am I? Right? And what I mean by that, right, is that you say, well, okay, who am I? Right? And then like, as a meditation, this is great too. Like you close your eyes and you sit and you just...
Very powerful.
Who am I? Okay. So there's first this sense of identity, like, okay, my name, who am I, what do I do, what am I involved with, etc., all those kinds of things. So that's the first. Okay, so past that. All right, yeah, but who's asking the question? Because who am I comes before and lives on after that. Like, who am I? Who's asking the question, right? Like, let's go deeper, back, right? In, beyond, outward. Who am I? It's not those things. It's not my name. It doesn't matter if I change my name. It's irrelevant. It doesn't matter if I look different, if I lose an arm tomorrow, I'm going to Hawaii this week to see my father. If a shark, eats me in half, I'm still me. So I'm not identifying, it's not my body, right? If everybody in my life leaves me, it's not my thing. If I am not able to do the vocation, who am I? There's still this sense of I am. All right, so now let's take a trip back 3 years, 5 years, 10 years to anybody who's listening to this. And you say, who am I? I am 10 years ago. Okay, so your life is different, you look different, you feel different, you do different things, maybe you have some different friends, etc. But you have the exact same sense of I am. All right, now let's take that back to your first memory in this life, right? 3 years old, 5 years old, 9 years old, 2 years old, 1 year, whatever the thing is. Whoa, you're real different then. But the same sense of I am, like picture yourself drinking a cup of milk or water or whatever the thing is as a child at 5 years old, and you're drinking it and you're thinking, well, I'm this person. And who is that? It's the same you. It's like when you hear people who are 90 or 100 and they're passing, they say, well, I feel just like a kid. And I look at myself and I'm like 100 years old. I can't believe it. It doesn't agree with this I am. Okay, so take it back. So the question is, the reason why this is the only important question, the reason why it keeps offering new answers is because where does that start, right? Does it start then in the womb? I am. Who am I? My sensibility in the womb is very much, precognitive, like I am. I'm coming. I am. Okay, so for everybody, fine. All right, so does it happen at conception, the sperm and the egg? Meet? When does it happen? Does it happen when your father and your mother first meet and they have eye contact? That spark. I am. They have your father and your mother, know them or not, had the same, or whether it's in vitro or however the child is born, like there's still I am. Like, what is this moment? Or is it between the grandparents when they first met? Or okay, so now we're really getting into the thing. Let's go back 1,000 years. Okay, let's go back 1,000,000 years, right? Like basic human, the sort of 5 million years. I am, same thing. Like every sentient animal has this sense of I am, like whether it's your dog or monkey. It's not in these words, but it's this sort of sense of being, right? So let's take it back, 1 billion years, 100 billion years, right? Like this sense of I am. This is really God. I mean, this is every butterfly, this is every blade of grass. This is every lover, every killer, every poet, every business person, right? This is everything. I am. It doesn't come across in those words, but it's a sense of being, right? And I think when there's just the Atman, when there's just non-duality, when there's just eternal space-time, and there's nothing, and God comes into existence, or God rather comes, proliferates physical existence, right? Because it's nice to have a separate and other so that there can be intimacy.
Yes.
Right? That God creates or manifests, proliferates outward or procures an other, splits off into two, right? From the beginning. So that there can be intimacy. Because that's so fun. And then eventually it dies out and then it starts again, right? All the time on a moment-to-moment basis. So the question is just that one. Who am I?
Oh, so good. Okay. I'm working stuff out now, Sebastian.
And I really appreciate the question because I'm Ramana Maharshi talks about the I, and he's one of my favorite authors, and all his collected works. The I, little I, here now, and the big I, right? And so in the basic meditation, it's the step, outside of the I, the little I, and to this big I. And who am I is a great meditation for that, right? You can't, getting into it, I used to do it for 3-4 hours in a row, twice a day. And then eventually an hour. And then eventually a few minutes. And then eventually it's just happening all the time. Like it's
so
always,
brilliant.
eventually the more you do the meditation, the less it works because it starts to take over all your life. Like that's the idea, to take a state experience and, and ground it into a stage development. And, in this series, the 8 questions, I'm interviewing all these different people, right? Whether it's James Hollis, the founder of the Jung Center, the most brilliant, living psychologist today. He's in his 80s. He's spectacular, and I highly recommend his books. A huge influence on me. You can search YouTube, The 8 Questions, James Hollis, and it's the greatest interview I've ever done with him. He's brilliant. Same thing, The 8 Questions, Ken Wilber, and he talks a lot about these things that have influenced me enormously. And his thing, for him, he only did one question, which is God, and it's 18 minutes, and it's spectacular. Roy Yamaguchi talks about food. Laird Hamilton and Makua Rothman talk about surfing, and they talk about God, love, purpose, heaven, hell, intimacy through those things. Horian Gracie and Kem Shamrock, 2 of the greatest fighters ever. My friend Frankie Carrillo, who was 20 years in prison. For manslaughter, innocent, overturned, and now this is spectacular, amazing family man. A guy who was burned alive, right, and then died, and then came back, 80% of the flesh on his body burned. That's all the 8 questions on YouTube. One of the most brilliant psychologists in Mexico, right, Alexa Thurman, spectacular. Francis Fisher from my film, one of those brilliant actresses ever. So Marianne Williamson, a friend who's just beautiful, extraordinary, speaker about love and such. And to the point of who am I is that I'm asking all these individuals these questions. John Daly, the prolific film producer, I'm asking all these people these questions to find out, where are they finding God? But I'm not asking them where they're finding God. I'm asking them through these questions, what are the moments that shape us, Richard Chamberlain's interview is really, 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 really beautiful. It was interesting. Richard Chamberlain's interview, if I may just indulge for a second.
Sure.
When I was asking him, what's hell? And this was originally from my first film, Awakening World, which is a simple 40-minute film. And it's distributed by Beyond Words, who also did The Secret and What the Bleep Do We Know. It's a really cool film to watch and discuss afterwards for a group of people, like at dinner or something like this. And I took it to all the festivals. And I realized the power of that film is not the questions or the answers, but it's the engagement of those questions that are largely ineffable. In other words, all the architecture and music and art and poetry in the world, we have to keep asking those questions, right? So when I ask Richard Chamberlain, what's hell? And then I bait at the end and I say, look, if there was a moment for you that was hellish, like one of the worst moments of your life, and that was, that was stretched out into an eternity, right? Like what would be like living in the worst moment ever, that you just had to keep living in that moment, like describe hell.
Yes.
And then I asked the same question for heaven, like not what do you think of as heaven, but like what's an amazing moment that you'd like to live in, for an extended period.
Fantastic questions. Really good questions.
And Richard talked about putting his dog down, 2 dogs.
I watched that one actually.
Yeah. Yeah.
Wow. I cried.
Yeah. And
It was heavy.
And he says, when we put our dog down, and when I was doing the interview, I could feel it.
That. I feel it.
Yes.
Oh,
and
dogs.
And he started to get teary-eyed, and I started to get teary-eyed, and we both cried, and then we both laughed, right? And so beautiful, okay? And so what is that about who am I? That's what he's saying, is that he's saying there's a beautiful, melancholic moment of recognition that God goes on, that life goes on, but that I get to touch this here now. That's so spectacular. Even this animal leaves, but God lives on. And I will leave, but God lives on. And the story that I tell in the movie Grace and Grit on Amazon and on Apple is that the lovers are separated, but God lives on. And so the lovers are unhappy, but God is happy.
What a way to end the podcast. Wow. Well, I want to just say thank you from the bottom of my heart. I think this episode was beyond profound. Very grateful for you. I think so many people are going to learn very, very valuable things from this podcast. Your energy is incredible. Thank you so much for everything you're doing in the world. I know it's beyond you. It's very selfless. I think so many people have different reasons why they do things. You're definitely one of the most selfless people I've met. So thank you so much, Sebastian. It was an honor and a privilege. And I can't wait to watch the movie that's coming out next year and to see what you do next.
Justine, thanks so much for having me here. It's such a pleasure.
Thank you.
Appreciate it.